This is a great way to take lawyers who otherwise might be looking around for work and give them a job to do. Legal services, by the way, caught on generally, largely because the organized bar, which had been fairly hostile to the idea originally, very quickly realized that it would be that legal services were a way of first giving jobs to young lawyers who might undercut the existing wage structure, and second, and better yet, sue the clients of the existing lawyers. So you do have these nexes, and just in housing, of course, you have the National Association of Home Builders, very much in favor of affordable housing. You have farm groups very much in favor of ethanol. You have all kinds of industrial groups favoring their own particular brand of thing they're selling as something that should be subsidized for people. What it really comes down to is there's a lot of hard choices here. And the trouble for any any central decision maker is, how do you get enough information to really answer all these questions? The Soviet Union fell apart, and command and control societies fall apart, not because the people who run them aren't smart or technically proficient, but it requires such an infinite amount of information at such a low level of visibility to make a society work, to figure out how you should allocate things, to figure out what people want, that it is simply totally beyond the ability of even the most informed central bureaucracy to do that. This is not new. F.A. Hayek wrote about this in The Use of Knowledge in Society 50 years ago. But we continually relearn these lessons in many fields, including affordable housing, including housing subsidies, and we've seen after many years that we have to have a much more modest, I think, view of what we can as a society accomplish, and maybe a more realistic view of the fact that we're going to have to do a lot more things in small groups on our own as per such little teams. So that's my remarks. I'd be happy to answer questions or comments.
There's been some buyout. I think the suburban communities.
Sorry, could you speak a little louder?
I'm Craig Long. I'm in Professor Simmons' property class.
I never see you.
Right in front of us. Some of the imposed lower and moderate income housing on the suburban communities, a few have succeeded in sort of buying their way out.
Yes, and yes, under Mount Laurel, yes. And this has been true in New Jersey. For instance, Newark has, some of these communities have been able under New Jersey law to sell half of their obligation to cities like Newark. And so it's a way of raising more money for the cities, which are good, but it's hardly, I think, consistent with this notion of having low and moderate income people spread through the state.
Sure, I wasn't sure how they actually, were able to do that. So it's allocated to, right. So that share is basically allocated to another community.
Yeah, they buy their way out.
It's in the statute. Yeah, it's in the statute, which the legislature repealed about a year ago, and now the governor is insisting that it be reinstated. So that's in detention.
Now, Professor Eugene Kierman, you mentioned that some people in legal services do different things, and one of them, as far as I know, is trying to get those entitlements to keep people in rent-stabilized housing. So do you think this is a good use of public money to pay for those lawyers who keep people in the subsidized housing? That's my question. Thank you.
That's a very good question. I think that if we're going to have certain idealizations codified as rights under law, and if government in fact decides that people ought to have certain rights, I would not think it's amiss for a government to also pay for lawyers to help enforce those rights. But again, that's really far down the chain, because we're saying that those rights should be there, and that there should be some enforcement mechanism. But again, think of it this way. If you think of the cost of those legal services, let's put it this way. If you have a low-income tenant, and the low-income tenant is having a problem with a certain landlord, and you think of the cost of vindicating that landlord's position, that is to say how much it actually costs to have the lawyers and paralegals and secretaries and others and building, and you say to yourself, what if I were to offer this person this amount of money? Would this person buy the service, or would this person use the cash for something else? And one of the reasons why goods are provided in kind, rather than simply giving cash payments. As I said before, the first and foremost problem of the poor is that they are poor. If they were not poor, you wouldn't have problems of housing for poor people. And people know when they're living in bad conditions. You know, they're not, I mean, they understand that. They understand that it's better. So the question is, how would a person who has more money choose to spend that money? The odds are it's not the way that the people who are providing services would want the person to spend the money. And that's why food stamps, for instance, is the result of a grand bargain struck by urban representatives who want to benefit their constituents, and agricultural interests who want to get the money by having food bought from the market. So and the same thing with the defense, same thing with many industries, same thing with legal services. I don't mean to, I certainly am not, I'm not denigrating legal services, but I am suggesting that you have the exact same coalition of service providers and government to give people lawyer stamps as opposed to food stamps, out of fear that if you gave them cash, they would find something that they thought was a better use for it.
Thanks.
Yes.
Hi, Kosi Remy. Do you think that a town's fulfillment of co-obligations through regional contribution agreements intensifies the argument that towns simply just don't have the infrastructure to support low-income residents in certain areas? For example, low-income residents typically don't have access to automobiles or insurance, and they don't have mass transit that isn't readily accessible in some of these rural areas that fulfill their co-obligations through regional contribution agreements?
Yeah, this is certainly a very valid point you're raising, and one of the problems, of course, with the Mount Laurel distributive scheme is that people want to live in communities where they feel comfortable, where they have access to services, and by services I mean any number of things, hospitals, stores that sell products they particularly like, friends, transportation, medical care. There's all kinds of services, and you're not going to take people who can't afford a suburban way of life and stick them way out in the suburbs and think they're going to be comfortable and happy there. Maybe part of it has to do with the fact that New Jersey traditionally is a state where the tax burden was placed on the individual counties and townships, and where the state traditionally did not provide centrally for a lot of things.
And I think it might be connected, because then that creates a lot of unfunded mandates for the town. With this now 2% cap on towns raising property taxes, it could have an effect on co-obligations and the unfunded mandates that it creates.
There is a real tension when states organize wide areas of life, and states at the same time want to have statewide democratic polity, want to have services provided for people all over the state, and at the same time want to recognize individual township or county autonomy. If you want to recognize autonomy, people are going to come up with different kinds of solutions, and people are going to want to specialize in different things. And this is another reason why it might be better to provide money, if money is going to be provided, to individuals who then might be courted by communities because they have money, rather than imposing burdens on communities that they somehow have to satisfy out of general tax revenues, which increases animosity with existing residents. Yes.
Yes, Professor. What about more people-centered programs like Habitat for Humanity, which me and my partner, we volunteered for that a few years back of building people's homes, of course, from the ground up, where it's a lot more affordable, less a whole lot of maybe government red tape to a degree. Is that also part? Is that also a way to go? Your assessment called Habitat for Humanity. I don't know if anybody heard of it.
Well, I think these are wonderful kinds of programs. I think that, excuse me if I say as an aside, that I think if only Jimmy Carter had spent his entire career working for Habitat, so much more. But that's certainly been certainly these are programs. And again, this is a Burkean notion of little platoons. The idea that we get together as people in our communities, in our neighborhoods, in our towns, in our churches, and we go ahead and do things. We see a problem, we pitch in, we have a day where everybody cleans up the vacant lots in our neighborhood. That's not the answer to everything, obviously, but certainly I think that's very salutary, and that is part of an answer to our problems.
Craig Bronsnick, in Professor Simmons' class as well. So we heard a lot of justifications after the financial crisis from individuals such as Congressman Frank, really defending the notion that affordable housing and low-income subsidies are for the greater good of a certain socioeconomic class, and that this financial crisis had nothing to do whatsoever with this economic mess, and that it was really just the free market and Wall Street and this and that. Is he right?
I'm not quite sure where your question is going, but let me put in a word in defense of Congressman Frank. And I say this even though he and I had a exchange at a debate run by the Century Foundation years ago, where he wanted only licensed broadcasters to be able to have public commentary in the periods before elections. And I was in favor of having unlimited campaign contributions, providing there was disclosure, and thought that his idea reminded me of getting UNESCO to license journalists and so on. He thought my ideas were obvious and juvenile. I'm not going to characterize that or my idea at this point, but he is I think that there's a tendency by people on the left to say that was really not a part of the problem, it's all Wall Street's doing. But there's also some tendency among conservatives to say that our current financial mess was caused by housing assistance for low-income people and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And I don't think either of those is really true. I think that there has been inflation in housing, there's been too much money throughout much of Western Europe as well as the United States. There have been bubbles in the commercial real estate market as well as the residential real estate market. Lots of money has been lost. There's lots of foreclosures in the commercial market. Many of the lawyers I've been involved with in the American College of Real Estate Lawyers and similar groups, all of whom deal with fairly sophisticated commercial deals, have had endless problems with this. So I really think that this has been a contributing factor, but certainly not the only factor. And I think there has been a proclivity in Congress, on both sides of the aisle, to do things which benefit favored constituencies and obscure and bury ultimate responsibility for them. So I really don't take sides in the sense of saying,